Greeting viewers, thank you for joining us. Columbia Global Centers Nairobi warmly welcomes both our local and global audience to the continuation of the African Book Talk series. Today we are honored to feature yet another new book by a member of the Columbia alumni. Before we get started, kindly note, this program is being recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. As we proceed, please post your questions under the Q&A section. The editors will be addressing them at the end of the session. Remember to follow us on social media so that you can stay updated on our upcoming programs. Our handles are at CGC Nairobi for Facebook and Twitter. For Instagram, our handle is cgc.nairobi. The Book Talk playlist is available on our YouTube channel. Our channel is Columbia Global Centers, Nairobi. I would now like to welcome our director, Dr. Murugi Dirango, to open the session. Welcome, Dr. Dirango.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's event. As Pauline has said, my name is Murugi Dirango, and I'm the director of Columbia Global Center, Nairobi. CGC Nairobi is the Eastern and Southern African regional hub for Columbia University. Today, we are delighted to host another event in our series of virtual book talks featuring writers that have a perspective on Africa. At CGC Nairobi, we offer a platform where African authors can engage a global audience, discuss their work, and provide exciting perspectives on how personal, political, and cultural experiences drive their writing. Today's talk will feature Sarika Bansal discussing the book Tread Brightly, Notes on Ethical Travel. Hassan Gedi Santur will moderate this conversation. Let me now introduce Hassan and Sarika. Hassan Santur is a journalist, editor, and novelist. His journalism work has appeared in CBC Radio, The New York Times, Yahoo News, and other publications. He's the author of the novels Something Remains and The Youth of God, and the nonfiction book Maps of Exile. The Youth of God was a finalist for the Pius Adesanya Memorial Award for Excellency in African Writing held in 2019 and nominated for Canada Reads in 2020. Santur is a graduate of the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. He is currently working on his third novel, Imagined Lives. Sarika Bansal is the editor-in-chief of Tread Brightly. She is an editor, storytelling consultant, and mentor with the Aspen Institute New Voices program. She was the founder and editor-in-chief of Bright Magazine, an award-winning digital magazine that told new solution-oriented stories about social change. Before that, she incubated two social impact publications at Medium, developed a curriculum for journalists at the Solutions Journalism Network, and served as a management consultant at McKinsey & Company. Her bylines have appeared in the New York Times, Guardian, Vice, and other publications. She holds an undergraduate degree from Harvard College and a master's in public administration from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, otherwise known as SIPA. Sarika has lived on 5 continents. She speaks 4 languages and is currently based in a cottage in a forest in Nairobi, Kenya. She lives with her husband, daughter, and an elderly German Shepherd. Maybe you'll hear from the elderly German Shepherd during this conversation. We will share a link to the full bios of our speakers in the chat box. Let me now invite Hassan to moderate the session. Welcome, Hassan.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the warm welcome, and also thanks, my special thanks to the Columbia Global Center in Nairobi, for all their support to all the alumni around the world, but particularly to those in Africa. And I am thrilled to welcome my colleague and friend, my co-editor, well, my editor of the book, this wonderful book, Tread Brightly, that I'm so proud to have my name on. And Sarika and I will just sort of talk, basically have a conversation about this book, how it came about, what it focuses on, and also we will be taking some questions from the audience. So let's get started, Sarika.
Hello. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited to be here with you virtually today and with everyone to be chatting about all things travel and ethics and just, how we show up when we go to new places.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So I want to start first by, before we get to a more sort of in-depth discussion, I just want to ask you a few questions. For instance, what was the genesis of the book? There are so many other topics you could have explored. So why ethical travel?
Yeah, so the book came about when we were both working at Bright Magazine, as you know, and we were thinking about this as a crowdfunding campaign for the magazine. It eventually grew to be much more beyond that, but the idea was that take something from what Bright Magazine was doing, which was focusing on social change from health, gender, education. And I started thinking about like, what is a thread that ties all of those together and what would make something really unique as well. And I started thinking about like the thing that I think that binds any type of global development work together is just that face-to-face interaction that happens, that and going to a new place and putting yourself in some place that's very uncomfortable and learning a little bit about the world. And when do you do that? When you travel, when you decide to step out of your comfort zone. I think that there's so many people within the development world who, do very serious things, but don't actually think very much about what that interaction really looks like and how they're really arriving when they go to a new place. So it kind of came born from that idea. I also started thinking about my own journey personally. A mentor of mine once told me that if you ever write a book, you should always have just one person in mind as your audience. And I mean, maybe this is slightly selfish, but I really did think of myself at 19 years old when I was so eager to save the world and travel everywhere and just meet everyone that I could and do good. And I was very naive about it. I probably had, very grandiose ideas of what I would be able to do. And I am just so grateful for having opportunities to travel to different parts of the world and to also have very generous teachers who helped me get humble and realize that it's not necessarily about all the good that you can do when you get to some place, but about just what that quality of that interaction looks like. And everything else that happens comes from that as a starting point.
Absolutely. And I think it would be fair to say that knowing you as well as I do, that I think travel has changed both our lives. It's been such an important aspect of our evolution as human beings. Like you, my family moved from Somalia to Canada when I was, young. And that was sort of my first taste of travel, even though that wasn't really quite travel, but it gave me my first sort of I think that's when I fell in love with the idea of going somewhere far away and somewhere very different, and then sort of continue that for the last 20 something years, or almost 30 years actually. I wanted to ask you, can you give our audience a general overview of the book and some of the themes it explores?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I do think that, of course, this does come from a very, I think the really nice thing about travel is that you can think about it in this abstract kind of way, especially now with COVID, and it does feel a lot more abstract, but it's also so personal, and we all have so many stories of when we've gone to a new place and just, fully just brought ourselves there and have just been open to what the world has had for us, and what happens during those moments. Those are so formative for pretty much everyone I know. So in terms of the book, here it is, Tread Brightly, Notes on Ethical Travel. It basically is a book of 17 different essays and photo essays as well. It's fully in color, and it explores a few different themes. I would say I think that there's like 4 broad themes that are woven throughout the book in some way, shape, or form. One of the themes is definitely doing good while traveling. So looking at people who go abroad for study abroad programs, who go abroad to volunteer, who go abroad to build houses, who just, people who are desperate to go to a new place, to put their stamp on the world, and to pat themselves on the back a little bit about how good they've done, and really looking at what is the possibility of doing good in a new place, and where are those dreams maybe a little bit too far-fetched, and where can people dial them back, but also how can we help people really have good dreams about that. A second theme is looking at the identity and of the traveler and the privilege that's kind of within that, or lack thereof. So for example, we have one essay that I really love called Traveling While Queer, which is someone who is gender non-binary, and they talk about their travels throughout the world, including in East Africa. And we have someone who talks about passport privilege, and how that sometimes is very invisible privilege that we have, that allows some people to treat the world like their oyster, and others to keeps them much more locked into where they're able to go. A third theme is of course the environment and the environmental impact of going to new places. And for that, we have several essays. One of my favorites, again, is one called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, that looks at, it's someone who decided to not travel by plane and went by train from the UK to China and back, and just what that journey was like and what that taught him. And we have several others kind of looking at the environmental impact of travel. And the fourth theme I would say is just that, what I was saying before, that cultural meeting point, that one-on-one quality of that interaction, which sort of goes along with the idea of identity and privilege. So for example, I wrote an essay in the book called Close Encounters of the Exotic Kind, where you have what happens when people are meeting people who are adorned very differently than they are, and often look at them like animals on a safari, and just take pictures of them and leave. And Hassan, you wrote a wonderful piece in the book all about the ethics of sex tourism, and what it's like to think about this multi-billion-dollar criminal industry, and are there ways to take those one-on-one interactions and make them more ethical in some way. So just looking at a whole range of different ways of traveling and modes of it. I would say that overall, I think one thing to note throughout the book is that a lot of it is in first person. We're not the only authors. There's 14 authors throughout the book, and a lot of the book comes from people's own experiences. And I think that helps with the tone of the book, to take it from being righteous of like, this is what you should do to travel, to more that, hey, this is my experience, and I'm just offering this story to you, and you can do with it as you will. So that was something I think that we were very careful about.
Absolutely, and we will explore these themes that you mentioned in more in more detail later on. But also, can you, for people who want to buy the book, can you just tell them the easiest way they can find?
Yes, of course. Yeah, you can just go to the website treadbrightlybook.com. I'll just type that into the chat over here. And for anyone who is in Kenya, there's instructions on how to get it in Kenya as well. But yeah, it's available in hardcover and paperback, and also in ebook. So lots of different ways to read it, and it's in full color in any way you get it.
Absolutely. One of the first lines of the book in the introductory chapter, and I think a reoccurring theme in the book, is the notion that travel leaves a lasting impact on us, that it changes us for the better. And I'm just curious, how has travel changed you personally, Sarika?
Yeah, oh my gosh, in so many countless ways. I think travel has made me personally just a more patient person. And it's so easy when you're growing up in whatever bubble you grow up in, to think that what you see around you is the way to do something. And as you travel, you can realize that it may be the way you do things or the way you grew up doing something, but it's not the only way. It's only a way. I mean, just like one example, just going to like when I, traveling to India, to places that people don't use toilet paper. And in the US, you only use toilet paper. I mean, there's just like, very small things like that, that just, you take for granted in one place, and it helps you recognize like your privilege, and just also how nothing in this world is certain, and nothing in this world is very prescribed. We've all just decided how we want to live our lives. So I think that's one thing. And I think it's just also just made me so much more patient with dealing with people, with different types of people. Just the more people that you meet on the road, I think it just helps just make you realize that if you want to get things done in this life, that it takes a village, and it just everyone has their own way of doing things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about you, Hassan?
For me, I would say, without even knowing, even as a young man, I unbeknownst to me, I was a chaser of what Virginia Woolf calls moments of being. These pure moments where you are just a being, like there is no past, present, you're just in that moment, and you're just in awe of whatever it is that you're looking at, seeing, experiencing. And over the years, I think I've kind of become addicted to that. But then the thing is, I mean, I suppose you can have that in your daily life, but it takes a lot more effort when you're dealing with work and traffic and, dinner and like all those sort of the mundane aspects of being a human being. You tend to lose, you tend to not experience those moments of being as much. Whereas when I'm traveling, I just find every day, every experience can have at least an element of those moments of being. And I think that's, to me, one of the reasons why I'm just in love with travel. And it could be something really simple. It could just be like, swimming in the middle of the Indian Ocean, and just sort of, there was one time I remember I was swimming somewhere, I think on the coast of Kenya, actually. One of the first times I came to Kenya, and there was a storm gathering. And so the sky was just this incredible dark sort of, it looked actually quite foreboding, but there was something really quite beautiful and something that made me alive, being in the ocean while the sky was just becoming so dark and foreboding. And I just remember those memories. And so, yeah, I'm addicted to that. And that's what travel does for me.
I love that so much. And actually, that reminds me of one quick story. So in the foreword of the book, I talk about how I love those ugly, beautiful moments of travel, which actually I feel like our cover embodies ugly, beautiful so well. So if you see our cover, it's like this very crowded beach. It's a photo from Italy by this wonderful photographer named Massimo Vitali, and it's it's this very, very crowded beach, and I think that you part of you looks at it and you're like, oh my gosh, like I don't know if I want to be there, but at the same time, it's these like gorgeous saturated colors and this fade, and it has this it just like has this effect on you. And I think that just that duality of that ugly and beautiful at the same time is something that I always look for. And I remember, like, for myself, once when I was on the coast of Kenya, we found this cove, and it was just like, it looked like it was something out of a movie. It was just, the sun is glistening down, and there's these rocks, and the ocean is this like turquoise blue color, and we're just like swimming and snorkeling around. And then I like come up, and right in front of me is this dead bat. And it was just this moment where I'm like, oh, okay, like it actually made the moment more real for me. It felt, it wasn't that frothy kind of, picture perfect movie moment. It was something that was really very real. And I just love that about travel, is just like looking for that duality.
Yeah. And I think it teaches us, when you're open to the fact and the idea that you can have an incredible, beautiful experience, but at the same time experience the opposite of it in that same moment. And it teaches you, I think, to open yourself up to that, the full experience of travel, and not to amputate some part of what it means to be a human being in this world.
Yeah. Like I think that, just the idea of like people like filtering all of their travel through a certain lens to make everything look a certain way. I mean, I get it, but at the same time, I think that those kind of
You're
that
all
tourist
fond of
way, it's all part of the journey.
yes. We're all guilty of, those Instagram filters to make it even prettier, but
Yeah.
there is something to be said for accepting the beauty and the ugly in the same moment as well. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I love about the book is that it's not prescriptive. It doesn't tell you, the reader, how to be an ethical traveler. And instead, it invites the reader to explore some issues relating to travel, maybe explore it from a different angle than you have been forced to encounter before. And for me, the book is just kind of a multi-dimensional conversation about this topic of travel and what it means. And so for you, how have you become a kind of a more ethical travel as a result of working on this book, or as a result of just being a traveler over the years?
Yeah. Well, I think that the idea of it being not being prescriptive and not telling you what to do is very intentional. Again, I started thinking about myself at 19 years old. And if someone told me like, these are the 51 things you must follow to be an ethical traveler, I would have been like, you know what, I'm going about this my own way. I don't want to listen to you. Who are you anyway? I think travel is one of those things that's so personal that it doesn't work to tell people what to do. I think I honestly think that's true with a lot of things in life, that it's often is more effective to offer something rather than to scold someone. So I think that is definitely true with this. And so yeah, so I think that for me, I think we achieved that in part by having so much of the book be first person, and not, and just kind of giving gentle suggestions or gentle ideas to people. For me, I would say like the thing that's changed for me while working on this book, in terms of how I travel in my real life, is, well, so one thing that's so while working on this book, I had my daughter, and so the book is like, I mean, she's not mentioned in the book, but I edited the book while I was breastfeeding her, and it was just like, so she's like very much intrinsically wrapped up into the book for me. And I think that having a baby and moving through the world just changes how you move through the world anyway. Because even as you're just walking down the street, the most stone-faced person who's very serious or who's very cool, once they see a baby, their humanness kind of comes out a little bit. And I think I lean into it a little bit more than I maybe would have otherwise. Where I'm just more up for having those idle chats when I have the moment to, when I have the time to do that, and to just like ask people questions them back to them, and just try to have that bit of exchange, because you never know where it's going to lead you. And yeah, I think that it's just, I think it's just a matter of like how you decide to move through the world wherever you decide to go. I would say one more tangible thing that's changed for me is just being a little bit more intentional about like where to stay while traveling, and trying to just think about like benefiting the local economy of where you're going. So, in terms of even like if you're buying like fruit, like just to try to get it on the side of the road as opposed to get it from like a large supermarket, or I don't know, small things like that, I think really just add up, and they change your experience as well when you go somewhere.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I would think also as a new mother that the environmental sort of aspect of travel would probably be something you think about even more, because now you're thinking about, your daughter, and like you want her to experience these parts of the world that are incredibly beautiful, but they're in danger. And so, I'm assuming that would also play a role in.
Oh my gosh, especially this IPCC report that's just come out, which I'm sure we'll touch on. That's pretty bad news for the world at large. Yeah, and it just it is, the world is such a precious place, and there's so many beautiful places in it to explore, but that can only happen if we go about it responsibly and just think about what our carbon footprint is. So yeah, absolutely, I think becoming a parent turns that a little bit more into overdrive too.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm trying to think of, as I was asking the question, I was also trying to sort of think about like how have I, as a result of working on this book, but also just as a result of being, sort of growing up and to be honest with you, I haven't really thought about sort of the ethical aspect of travel when I was younger, but lately I'm becoming a lot more conscious of it. So one of the things it has done for me, I think, is just being like a lot more conscious of not only how to behave when I get there, but actually where to go in the first place. Because as we will touch on later, there are places there that really don't need any more tourists and travelers. They're like, they cannot accommodate any more people. So I am now like, as much as I would like to see, you know, certain cities in the world, maybe it's a good idea that we actually, you know, give some other parts of the world that are equally as beautiful a try, and instead of just saying, you know, everybody I know, everybody in my social circle has been to Venice or whatever, fill in, you know, the blank. And I'm just like becoming a lot more aware of that. And instead of having a checklist in my sort of in the back of my mind that I want to tick off because everybody I know has been there. So just being a lot more conscious about where to go, but
Yeah.
also once you get there, like you said, like where to stay has become a lot more important to me now. So you know, I think in one of the articles it talks about like when you go to a big resort, do you know how much that resort owner or the company that owns are paying, like how much they're paying their waiters and their cleaners? Do they have, do they provide healthcare to them? Do they have job security? Do they recycle? Do they, like all these little things that I would have never thought about before? I'm just becoming a lot more conscious of.
Yeah, it's so true. And actually that's very real for me and my family right now as we're just planning a little holiday to the coast. And we talked to this one place and they were like, oh yeah, we have a nanny available if you want. It costs, you know, this much per hour, which is like much higher than I expected the price to be. Then I just
Mhm.
started wondering, I'm like, I wonder how much the woman is getting versus how
Mhm.
much the resort is taking. And it actually made me just not want to stay there because I was like, I'm sure it's going to be like she'll get 10% of what that overall price is.
Mhm.
And that just made me very uncomfortable. I would rather
Mhm.
just deal with someone directly and
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
and just make sure that, you know, I'm treating them well.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. Just to move into a bit more sort of specific areas of the book or themes, I think in the section where you talked about sort of traveling, doing good while you're traveling, one of the pieces in that sort of thematic box is one of my favorite pieces in the book called "Do No Harm," written by you, and explores this sort of multi-billion industry known as volunteerism. And
Yeah.
for people who may not be familiar with the term, what is volunteerism exactly? And can you tell us a bit about that piece, which is, I think, very relevant to not only Africa, but Kenya in particular, because I think Kenya receives a kind of disproportionate number of these volunteerists.
For sure. Actually, before I get into that, I would love to just like open this up a little bit to the audience. And
Mhm.
as I said, travel is so, so personal. So if you just want to, if everyone just wants to write in the chat box, like what ethical travel means to them personally, it would be really great to read it and just to see everyone's responses, what they are, because I know that there's no one set definition at all. So I'd love to hear from all of you. So back to volunteerism though. Yeah, I really enjoyed researching what volunteerism is and what it has the potential to be and what the unintended consequences of it are. So volunteerism is a portmanteau or two words smashed together, volunteering and tourism. So basically it's people who go on holiday and decide to give back while they're on holiday. And it often comes from a very, you know, very, very good intentions, people who don't want to just like go and use a place, but want to really, you know, be just like learn about a new place and just like go in much deeper and just be, you know, just be a more intentional traveler. So I think it comes from that intention. The origins of volunteerism I found while researching it is can be traced back actually to like missionaries, where, you know, people would go often, like Christian missionaries would go often from like Europe to Africa for several years, and then they would, you know, set up a school or a hospital and teach English. And I mean, there was this underlying idea of, you know, the God, gold, and glory, and, you know, just like helping to convert people throughout that process. But there were a lot of, you know, benefits as well, even though there was an obvious savior kind of attitude towards it, which, you know, hasn't fully disappeared today necessarily. I think there's a lot of that in the voluntourism industry right now as well. And you know, right now what the voluntourism industry looks like, it's not very well regulated, so it's hard to exactly say, but it often consists of young privileged people from the global north, from, you know, from North America, from Europe, from Australia, traveling to other parts of the world, to Africa, to Asia, Latin America, and volunteering their time. Often these people are young, they don't have that many skills necessarily, and they're there for a short time, like maybe 2 weeks or up to a month, let's say. And a lot of the projects that people do when they volunteer overseas relate to children. So it's, you know, working in orphanages or working in schools is prime, like, you know, those are two very, very big ones. Of course, there's other things people do as well, like environmental cleanups and other things, but working with children seems to be a pretty recurring theme I've noticed.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you that the piece actually really examines the ethics of, you know, somebody coming in for 2 weeks, say, and, you know, playing with the kids and bonding with the kids, and then their 2 weeks is up, and suddenly this child is left with, not only because a lot of times these orphanages, you know, these orphans have had their primary caregivers, you know, not being a part of their lives, and then now this human being that they've bonded with has now just suddenly disappeared. So, you know, can you talk about some of the sort of psychological impact that can have? You know, this is why I think you called your piece "Do No Harm" first of all, before you
Yeah.
do anything else.
Yeah, of course. It's like the, you know, which is the Hippocratic Oath, of course, like, you know,
Mhm.
first do no harm. And yeah, I think that with orphanage tourism, by and large, anyone who's, you know, serious in this industry sees it as a problem in some way, shape, or form. First of all, the entire concept of orphanages, they are a bit of a fiction in some ways. Like, about 80% of orphans, quote unquote, or orphans in the world, or orphans and orphanages, have at least one living caregiver. It may not be their parent, but they have someone else who can be their caregiver. And yet there are orphanages. And another thing I found through researching the book was that orphanages tend to exist in places where there are a lot of tourists. This is very apparent in countries like Cambodia, where there's a lot of orphanages, and also Nepal. So in Nepal, over 90% of orphanages are found on popular tourist hiking routes. So so that kind of shows you that, you know, they exist for tourists in some way. Some people almost consider them more like boarding schools, where it's like the, you know, the parents don't have very much, or the caregivers don't have very much to offer to the children. So they're like, okay, well, just go there and they'll be taken care of in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes they are, but then sometimes, of course, there's not really any protection for them. And then you do have this rotating cast of young people who come in, who play with them, form bonds with them for a few weeks, and then they leave. And that, you know, like there's been a lot of research on the psychological harms of growing up in a large institution in the first place versus growing up, you know, if you can get towards more of a foster care model, an adoption model, which is what you have in most of the rich world. And so, you know, those have much better outcomes, even though those systems are broken in many ways as on their own, but compared to large institutions, they're still much better. And then also just like the idea of like building trust with someone and then having them go is just like another form of way that, you know, these children can grow up without feeling like they can really form those deep bonds, and they can really trust that that person's going to be there in the long term.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, there's definitely like pretty much everyone I interviewed for the book was you know, was just like, you know, you can talk about like the ethical way to do a lot of things, but I don't think there's an ethical way to do orphanage tourism. It's just, it's one of those things that it's not, there's no checklist on how to do it well if you're going to be exploiting a child in the end. So it's so much so that actually Australia has banned it. They have banned anyone from going overseas to volunteer in an orphanage. It's not super easy to regulate, but at least that
Mhm.
intention is there.
No, absolutely. And there are so many things I want to ask you about that piece because it's such an important part of the book. But we don't want to leave with the feeling
Yeah, of
of,
course.
don't do it at all. Is there a
Yeah.
way to do it in a more ethical way that you've been able to find out?
Yeah, I think that the idea of, when you think about like most people who I know who do some career in their life that is like has like a social good element to it. It often is that moment of, going overseas to volunteer, to study, or just to be in a place where they feel very, completely at sea. Like those really formative moments for people.
Mhm.
And I don't want to take that away from them, because especially if it can lead to a lifetime of, a career and doing something, it's like, I think telling people just don't do it
Mhm.
isn't the most helpful thing to do. Plus, the only people who will actually listen to that advice are probably the most sensitive people and the people who are very brash and are going to, just kind of tell people what to do. They're just going to do it anyway. So it kind of, I feel like the advice ends up going to the wrong ears in some way. But I would say that, a lot of it is just your approach, is just, and it's hard to measure exactly, but just that
Mhm.
idea of entering without so many expectations, and just entering with the idea of being a wide-eyed student.
Mhm.
There was some of the people who I interviewed for that piece were talking about, a lot of voluntourism is cast as service learning, right? And they instead switch it to say, what if you do learning service? And so instead of doing service first and assuming that you have something that is of value to others, what if you first go with the idea that you can learn and just be a sponge in some way.
Yeah.
And I think also it's like, if people have genuine skills that they can offer, really think about where you can put yourself in. So if you've taken some courses in your university in accounting, maybe you can do some volunteer work with an NGO and help them with their accounts or with their fundraising materials or something. And
Mhm.
just like think about how you can use your skills, further them, be an apprentice in some way, and actually contribute in a very tangible way. So I think that would be
Yeah.
my advice. But
Yeah.
a lot of it really just comes from that approach.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the people that you interviewed talks about going there with humility, which I love the idea of,
Yeah,
like you said, not coming there to save anybody or to fix things, but to actually learn. Yeah, 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 absolutely.
absolutely.
There's so much I can ask you about that piece, but there are also other things that I wanted to ask you
Of
because we're
course.
sort of coming closer to that time. Let's talk a little bit about the environment and ecotourism.
Yeah.
And there are, I think, let me see if I can remember there. So there's a piece called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. There's another piece called Venice, a sinking ship. There's a fantastic piece on the awful cruise ship industry called Adrift, the dark side of the cruise industry. Can you touch a little bit upon like what some of these pieces all have in common in terms of the environment and travel?
Yeah, I think that a lot of them just have in common the idea that tourism has a major impact on the environment. I didn't know the amount of tons that from an economy flight from New York to London. I think, like, if I remember this correctly from the book, that emits one economy ticket from New York to London emits as much carbon into the world as driving a car for a year. Like it is such an enormous, and 80% of flights are for leisure. Of course, this has all changed in the with the pandemic and everything, but pre-pandemic, that was how it was. We spend a lot of carbon and on things that are done for leisure. Uh, and so I think that's just like that's one theme I think throughout. The cruise ship industry is really quite intense in terms of like the amount of garbage they're just like pushing out into the ocean, and are able to do so without again, the regulations around it are a little bit lax. There's another piece on ecotourism hotels in Nicaragua, and that kind of touches on the like what are all of the different elements of an ecotourism hotel, and like there's a lot of greenwashing that can happen, or like people who say they're doing a lot of good but aren't necessarily. So there's a lot of gray areas there.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite pieces in the book is the one about traveling by plane, and there was a particular statistic that really just shocked me, which is that 80% of the world's population has never set foot on an airplane.
Yeah.
It really shocked me, because consider all the flights around the world at any given moment, and that's like only 20% of the world's population. Obviously,
I mean, it makes sense if you think about like just global inequality and like who the haves versus have-nots, and the the super haves who decide to go to space for a day just for fun. It makes sense, but it's also it is so shocking. But you think about like that 80% of people, it's like, but so they haven't traveled before, and that's also not true. I think of travel as just anytime you step out of your front door, you're traveling. And I think this is again something the pandemic has taught all of us, is just like finding that beauty and finding those gems that are really close by, and really appreciating everything that has to offer, because any place that's around you, it's exotic for someone. And I think that that's another thing that I've taken away very strongly from working on the book and learning more about the environmental impact of travel.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think the environment gets a pretty, and also ecotourism and all the sort of ecological, ramifications of how we travel, I think it's a pretty good representation in the book. Another theme that gets, I think, a lot of coverage is the idea of, these cultural meeting points where, when you travel, you're coming into contact with another human being who might be very, very different from you. Can you talk about some of those connections, that we make with the people that we meet? And I think for me, travel at its best is, the travel has the potential to change us and leave a lasting impact on us. Is that like I remember when I was writing and researching for the piece about can sex tourism ever be ethical? I interviewed this professor at Harvard University who said something really interesting, which is the idea of, when some people travel, they experience what he calls sort of time out of time, space out of space kind of mentality, which is the idea that, the way they behave at home suddenly becomes completely different than the way they're behaving if they're in Thailand or, Mombasa or whatever. And that a lot of that has to do with how they're treating the people that they're meeting and how they're interacting with those people. Yeah, and I was wondering if you could just sort of talk a little bit about the cultural sort of meeting point idea.
Yeah, it is so true. I think that there's some people who they go somewhere and they're just like, oh, I can act however I want here, and use this place almost like my playground. And you forget the idea that you're a guest in someone's home when you're traveling, number one. And you forget the idea that, where you're traveling, it may be just like all fun and games, big party place for you, but it's also you're in someone's house, in some way. So I think it's just a lot of it is just remembering that, and just helping people also just remember that other people, even if they look very different from you, like they're human and they have their own stories, which, if you just take the time to listen to them, are fascinating. I really loved writing this one essay that I wrote in the book, that I mentioned before, The Close Encounters of the Exotic Kind. And that was born from going to several places around the world where part of the cultural, the sort of the tourist circle that you do is meeting people who are indigenous to that area, and they're dressed in their, you know, in their garb with their jewelry and, you know, whatnot. And just that, and what that tourist to local interaction looks like. And oftentimes I found it to be so strained and so artificial that it's made me feel very uncomfortable. And then and just like what I prefer to do in those types of situations is, instead of just going and taking pictures, is to just stop and just start asking them a couple of questions about their life, which is, I found the way that people are surprised when I do that makes me a little sad, because it suggests that that's not a lot of people's automatic tendency.
Mhm.
Yeah, and in that same essay, I also reflect on when I became once the cultural oddity. When I this is on my honeymoon, I had an Indian wedding with you know, I had henna all over my hands, and so it was like, you know, this dark red design all over my hands, and so it's like very apparent. And so I went to Cuba, and I guess in Cuba on the state TV every Friday or something, they play Bollywood movies. Several people told me, and so people were actually like stopping and like pointing at me and like, you know, nudging their friends and like, oh my
Mhm.
God, look at her, like she's like from one of the Bollywood movies. And luckily I speak Spanish, so I ended up just having really interesting conversations with people about like what Cuban wedding traditions are like versus what mine was like. I showed them pictures. It was just like, it ended up becoming like this really rich cultural exchange, but that's also because I had the agency to do so. And I, you know, I wasn't looking, you know, that's not how I was earning my livelihood, was from getting
Mm.
money from tourists to take my picture.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you about the sort of the never forgetting that human connection, and sort of, and I think one of the things that really saddened me as a result of doing a couple of the pieces in this book was the story about the sex tourism industry, is that according to the ECPAT, this is an international network of organizations working to end sexual exploitation, and sex tourism is a $20 billion industry. Like, just
Yeah.
like, I can't even fathom that kind of money. And the same organization also estimates that annually 250,000 people travel internationally with the explicit intention of engaging in sex tourism. And that just blew my mind. The idea that there are all these, you know, thousands and tens of thousands of people who are literally leaving their homes so that they can sort of engage in this activity where so many people suffer as a result of, and then come back to their normal life and carry on going to the office. Like, I find that really quite I find it hard to compute it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And yet there are, I mean, there's also, you know, a whole other school of thought, just that, you know, sex work is work. And like, how do we just make this dignified? And how do we make it so that both parties are, you know, are treated with dignity and respect throughout that process instead of being
Mhm.
exploited? Um, and yeah, and I think that you do such a great job of exploring like what those protections could look like,
Mhm.
for people who are some of the most marginalized in the world in many ways.
No, absolutely, yeah. No, we can't really have these uh, you know, black and white kind of approach to these very complicated social and you know, economic and uh, just environmental. So many dynamics play in these issues that you can't really like go in there with these like ban it all or just open it all up kind of approach. It doesn't really quite work that way. Is there anything else that you wanted to? Because we should go to
We should
the
get to, yeah.
Q&A
Um,
section. Is there
no, I
any
think that, yeah, I think let's get to the Q and A's, because I also, I would love, I see that Eva has written in about what she thinks is at the what does ethical tourism mean to her, but I would love to hear from more of you of like, what does it mean? So she says that for her, ethical tourism is being a tourist without being unaware of the culture you are visiting. So without being, so being aware of the culture you are visiting.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
very important. Yeah.
Hassan, how would you define it for yourself?
For me, I think because I'm still learning about, what it means to be an ethical traveler. And so my opinions and my ideas are constantly sort of forming and shifting depending on what I am, sort of who I'm reading, what people are telling me. So for now, I think the most sort of concise definition that I can give is just being a responsible, conscious, conscientious traveler. And that sort of covers a lot of the way that you would behave when you get there, how you interact with people, the way you spend your money, where you spend your money. All those are sort of ethical considerations that I think are well informed by just being conscientious and conscious about what you're doing and where you're going.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think that for me also, it's like just the intentionality behind things. 'Cause I think so many times people just do things because it's the thing everyone else is doing or the thing that you're
Mhm.
supposed to do. And I think ethical travel is just, just taking that second to be like, is this really what I want to be doing? Is this is this in line with my values? And
Mm,
just, asking yourself that a little bit.
absolutely. Not to move away from the idea of ethical travel and what other people have to say, but we have a question from Fartun Hussein. Um, and she asks, what's your advice for new writers on how to navigate writing and publishing? And, we have had quite the interesting journey to publishing this book. Can you just touch upon like some of the experiences that you had in
Yeah.
publishing this book, and then also any advice that you have for writers?
Well, I would say advice really should come from you because you publish so many books. But I'll talk briefly about the process of publishing Tread Brightly, which again, the website is treadbrightlybook.com. Please check it out. So we started this, and I first did go to several traditional publishers for it. We eventually ended up deciding to self-publish the book because I got a couple of rejections from traditional publishers, and I got rejections for a couple of reasons. Number one, I had a vision for the book, which I'm so happy that I feel like has been realized. That I wanted it to be in full color. I wanted when I think of travel, I think of, the visuals are so important to that. And I didn't want it to just be like looking like a novel. And that makes it much more expensive, like, 6x the cost for printing or something like that. So I think a lot of people were just like, well, if you wanted to do this in black and white, then, we could work with you. And just also the number of images that I wanted to do would eat up so much more ink, even if it were in black and white. So that was one thing. And then the other thing was just that because it's a compilation of different writers and not just one person who's the main person, that I think it also makes it much more difficult for a lot of publishers to be really interested in it. So those are I realized that I was going to have to compromise in both of those, which I just didn't want to. I also realized that the timelines for when you work with a traditional publisher end up getting stretched out so much, up to 18 months, 2 years, depending on who you're working with, just like the process of like first writing the proposal to doing all of those steps. So so for us, for this project, self-publishing ended up being the best way to go. There are a lot of resources that I found online, and also just, I worked with a book consultant as well, to help make the even if it is a self-published book, to make it so it's not just, something that you just like up in one day decide to publish, but like, something that is very real. So, we have like an ISBN, it's like registered with the Library of Congress, and there's all of these, that side, the business side of everything. But then there's also, I think, just a lot of steps that we took in terms of editing the book, copy editing, everything to make sure that it's as professional of a product as we can as we could make it.
Absolutely. In terms of sort of any advice on writing and publishing, I think you touched on this idea actually of when you're writing, and I think this goes for whether you're writing, an article or, fiction or play, whatever it is that you're writing, you have to have an audience in mind. And for me personally, there are people who think about other people as an audience. I can't do that. So I have an audience of one, and that's me. And usually it starts with the kind of book or the kind of article that I would like to read, that I would like to, that I think that I'm, for whatever reason, I'm not finding it. And I think if you're always on that sort of line of like what you, the kind of book that you would like to see that you're not finding, then maybe you are the person to do it. And just sort of trust that instinct, and sometimes it can go very far, that instinct.
Yeah. Also, another piece of advice that I got from someone, which this is more, I mean, this is a book of essays, so it's a little bit different. So, but this is more for, if you're writing a book that would be just like one topic, is to start with a magazine story if you can. This is for nonfiction. And, to start with something smaller and see if you're still interested in it after writing, something that is, let's say, 10,000 words on it. And if the topic is still interesting to you, then pursue something bigger. But, don't just jump into the big thing, because halfway through you may find that, it's not really what you want to be spending your time on.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Do we have any more other sort of questions or comments in the chat section? Can you let me see.
Someone else talked about what ethical tourism, I believe, is a misnomer, as all tourism travel should be entailed within an ethos, polites, in doing least harm, which sadly is not atavistic within most people. Yeah, I unfortunately, I think that there are a lot of people who don't travel with the idea of doing no harm. I do hope that if this book can just help people be even just 5% a little bit more intentional when they travel, and consider themselves a little bit more to be guests, as opposed to, I've paid to be here, so I can do what I want. So, just like changing that mindset a little bit, then I feel like the world would be such a better place already.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. We're about out of time. Is there any lasting advice, comment, observation about what it means to be an ethical traveler that you wanted to share? Or
actually, I would love to turn it back to you. I love your essay in the book about getting lost while traveling, and just like that moving away from having the detailed agenda of what you're going to do to becoming lost. I'd love for you to just talk about that, because I think it's so much fun.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good note to end on, so that next time that you're traveling, because I think it's quite human to have a list of all the major things you want to see and do, and we've all done it. I'm definitely guilty of buying those those guidebooks that tell you the top 10 places to visit in Rome or Paris or whatever, which can be great and wonderful. But I think lately some of my most memorable experiences have been when I've chucked all those lists and guidebooks and have just really, like I said, really just be one-on-one with whatever that city or place is offering, without having that experience mediated by some expert who was there 2 years ago and tells you all the things you need to see. And I think this is something that Anthony Bourdain talks a lot about, this idea of chucking that itinerary and just really being in the moment and experiencing things. So yeah, I wrote this piece about getting lost intentionally in Rome, because it's such an ancient city, and there are all these winding streets, and sometimes in some neighborhoods it's really impossible to navigate. And so instead of getting really sort of anxious and not knowing where I am, I just sort of one day decided I'm just gonna give myself into this experience. And it was one of my favorite travel moments of all time.
Yeah, I love in that essay how you talk about how you just found yourself at a square, not one of the major ones that you would know, but it was like golden hour, and you got yourself some ice cream, and people are just like sitting at a little roadside cafe and having their, you know, having their happy hour drinks, probably Aperol spritz or whatever, and you're just like in this, like, it felt like almost like the movie Roman Holiday. And it was just it just transports you. I love that about travel. I
But
think
I
that
am pretty sure that if I stuck to my itinerary for the day, I would have been on the next bus or train to some other location where there was something I needed to see, you know. So,
yeah, and I hope that's one thing that people just leave this this whole chat with, and the book with, as well as like, is that this isn't supposed to be a chore. You know, you shouldn't be just like beating yourself up, but just like really truly just like discovering the joy in travel, and just like losing yourself in a place, and like allowing a place to just have to wash over you, and see where the world takes you.
And to leave its mark on you.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic note to end on, Sarika.
I think so too.
Yes. And I will now pass the chat to Lillian.
That was beautiful and superb. Thank you, Sarika and Hassan, and the organizing team members from CGC Nairobi. Thank you so much for making this webinar a success. We really value your partnership, Hassan and Sarika, our alumni. We hope you enjoyed our audience, the presentation. I enjoyed it myself. And we welcome your feedback and comments through our communication channels. My deepest gratitude goes to you, our audience. We sincerely value your support and participation. And we hope to see you in our next session of the series, as well as other webinars in the pipeline. And to just keep you updated, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter at CGC Nairobi, and Instagram, cgc.nairobi. And with that, I would like to say a very big thank you. Asante sana, and hope to see you next.
Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure and a joy.
Thank you to Columbia Graduate Center, Global Center.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, bye.